Figure drawing is one of the most sought-after skills in art. A successful figure drawing combines anatomical accuracy with exquisite expression. But underneath every detailed and finished figure drawing is a simple gesture drawing that captures the action of the pose. If you want to draw the human figure, the first skill you need to learn is gesture drawing. A good gesture drawing simplifies a pose down to its most essential elements, but it also captures the dynamic action of a pose. Gesture drawing is the first step toward more complex and completed figure drawings, but even this most basic of figure drawing skills can be overwhelming to beginners. I'm Brent Eviston. In this video, I'm going to simplify the gesture drawing process. I'll strip it all the way down to its most essential elements. By the end of this video, you will understand what gesture drawing is, why it's so important, and you'll have an accessible gesture drawing process that you can apply immediately in your own drawings. This powerful approach to gesture drawing is the first skill you need to learn and will form the foundation of the rest of your figure drawing practice. Everything else you learn about the figure can be incorporated into the basic gesture drawing process that I'm about to show you. Now, if you're completely new to figure drawing, you may not have a solid grasp on what gesture drawing is or why it's so important. So let's start there. Gesture drawing is the most important but least understood part of the figure drawing process. It often seems that every artist approaches gesture drawing differently, but here is a basic definition that I think most artists would agree with. Gesture drawing is a simplified form of figure drawing that captures the action of a pose. A gesture drawing can be a finished figure drawing in and of itself, or it can form the foundation for a much longer and more completed figure drawing. Here in this video, we're going to focus on gesture drawing as the first step toward a more complex and finished figure drawing. A successful figure drawing must serve two purposes. First, we want our figure drawings to appear alive. We want them to appear as if they could erupt into motion at any moment. This means that a good gesture drawing should be drawn with fluid and energetic lines that attempt to capture and even exaggerate the action of a pose. Now, the second function of a gesture drawing is that it serves as an armature to which we will later attach muscle, flesh, and bone. Now, I use the term armature very intentionally because an armature is something that you can pose. It's something that you can move and adjust. An armature also refers to a framework that you can build upon, like the armature underneath a clay sculpture, for example. This is important that because the first attempts we make at capturing the pose are not going to be correct. This is one of the most foundational principles in drawing. We assume that our first attempts at the figure will need to be adjusted, changed, or even erased. So we need a gesture drawing process that allows for this. We need to start with something that we can move and adjust, and once it's right, something that we can build on top of. Once we've made our first attempt at our basic gesture drawing, we can adjust it until it captures the proportions and forms of the pose. Only then should we build on top of it and flesh out the figure. One of the most common mistakes I see beginners make is adding detail, anatomy, and shading before they've figured out the basic proportions of their pose. By starting off with this simplified gesture drawing that you're about to learn, you can work out all of the basic forms and proportions of the pose before you add any shading or detail. This will help you avoid running into problems much later in the drawing that may result in erasing a lot of hard work. So now that you have a good sense of what gesture drawing is, I'm going to introduce the essential elements that make up a good gesture drawing. The first step of a gesture drawing is to simplify the figure into as few lines as possible. These lines are called action lines. We call them action lines because they do not yet depict the actual figure itself. They depict what the figure is doing. Now, this concept may seem a little confusing, but allow me to clarify. When we use an action line to simplify a torso, the action line is not a contour of the torso itself. It's really capturing what that torso is doing. An action line says the torso is bending this way. The action line of an arm is not a contour of an arm. It says the arm is reaching this way or bending this way. If it helps, you can imagine arrows at the end of your action line. This may help remind you that these lines are not depicting the figure itself. They are depicting the distance and direction that the various parts of the figure are traveling. Action lines work best when you send them down one edge of whatever part of the body you're drawing. Usually, it works best to send an action line down the convex side of whatever part of the body you're drawing. The word convex refers to a shape that is bulging outward rather than scooping inward. Whether I'm drawing a torso or a leg, I always look for the convex edge. Action lines also work best if you draw them along the outermost edges of the figure. This helps establish the overall width of a pose. I'll talk more about this in the demonstrations. Action lines can be used throughout the gesture drawing process to depict both the torso and the limbs. Action lines can show the placement, the direction, and the length of each and every part of the body. They're an incredibly useful tool to simplify a pose. I usually begin a gesture drawing by looking for a pathway that unifies as many parts of the body as I can. I refer to this as the primary action line. Sometimes they seem to flow from the head into the torso, down the leg, all the way to the feet. Next, let's explore axis lines. An axis line will capture the tilt of the shoulders or pelvis. Axis lines are particularly useful when drawing the shoulders. When combined with action lines, axis lines do a wonderful job at shaping the torso. Now, when you're capturing the tilt of the shoulders or pelvis, it's important to remember that these parts of the body tilt much more than many people realize. We often have a tendency to try to stabilize the pose and make the shoulders and pelvis more horizontal than they actually appear. So do your best to capture the actual tilt of these parts of the body. Next, let's talk about the shape of the torso. Action lines do an excellent job depicting arms and legs because the limbs are much longer than they are wide. But when drawing the head and the torso, it's important to work out their overall shapes. First, let's take a look at the basic shapes of the torso. The torso contains two rounded forms stacked on top of one another. The lower shape of the torso contains the pelvis and is more circular, while the upper shape of the torso contains the rib cage and is more ovular. When drawing males, the pelvis can appear a little smaller and the rib cage can appear a little larger and wider. Females tend to have a larger, more rounded pelvis with a more narrow rib cage. But it's always important to observe the unique characteristics of the model that's right in front of you. Now let's take a look at the shape of the head. The head can be simplified into a rounded shape for the cranium with a simple indication of the jawline. Remember, at this stage, the goal is simplicity. All this basic form needs to do is capture the basic size and placement of the head. We don't want to add any detail until much later. Finally, let's talk about the hands and feet. The hands and feet should only be implied. Just like with the head, we are only trying to capture their basic shape and placement. The feet can be simplified into triangular or wedge shapes. The hands can be simplified into basic mitten shapes. We do not need to draw individual fingers. So these are the elements that make up a simplified gesture drawing. The goal here is to use these elements to capture a dynamic expression of the pose. Once we've made our initial attempt, we can make adjustments to the simple gesture drawing until it captures the basic forms and proportions of the pose. After that, fleshing out the figure becomes so much easier. We can add detail and anatomy with confidence, knowing that the basic forms and proportions have already been established. But remember, in order to make adjustments to the gesture drawing, we need to draw it using incredibly light lines. So with all of this in mind, let's head to the drawing board where I'm going to demonstrate gesture drawings for 3 different poses. To begin this drawing, we can see a beautiful primary action line that runs from the tip of the chin, down the front of the chest, down the stomach, and all the way down the leg to the bent knee. Now, it's critical to remember how important it is to keep your initial lines light and soft because they will rarely be correct the first time and will almost certainly need to be changed. For example, I think I can push the chest out a little bit further and angle the leg back a little more. So here is where we have the chest pushed out. I'm going to send a line back to the clavicles or the collarbones. And here I can see the collarbone tilting and moving toward the shoulder. We have a shape for the pelvis, which is going to be more circular, and a shape for the rib cage that's going to be taller. I want you to note that the initial primary action line flowed right down the front of the torso. The front of the torso is also convex. Not always, but most of the time, following the convex edge of a form is going to work best. Now that I have the simplified shape for the torso, I can begin to add the additional arms and legs. I'll project this leg forward, once again following the convex edge. I want to note how far out this leg projects. Here at the knee, the leg is going to change direction and travel downward. And here we see a subtle indication of the foot. Once again, I want to remind you, these are just first attempts and will very likely need to be changed. Next, I'll draw a single line for the arm. I can simplify the entire arm into a single curve. Next, I'll draw a line upward for the neck. I'll give an indication of where the chin is and draw a simple indication for the head. At this stage, I have all of the basic elements of my gesture drawing, and now I can start to refine it. Even at this simple stage, we can figure out if the proportions are correct. We can also figure out if the shapes for the torso and the head are correct. I think the bent leg in the back could be just a little shorter. I'm going to draw my second attempt slightly darker. This way I know which was my first attempt and which was my second attempt. I think this foot on our left can go just slightly lower. With these more basic forms in place, I can now begin to add some of the more subtle anatomical features. Now remember, gesture is not about anatomy, but we can start to flesh out these forms just a little more. I'll make just a few more simple refinements. I can see that the leg on our right doesn't line up exactly on the primary action line, so I'm going to move it back just a little bit. I'm going to give a subtle indication of the shape of the hand. I'll make the line for the arm just a little more specific and detailed. Here, I'll indicate the location of the elbow. And from here, I can begin to shape the rest of the figure. Once again, I'd like to note that this is a very simple gesture drawing, but it does so much work to describe the action of the pose. This is a gesture drawing I would feel absolutely comfortable fleshing out and creating a more finished drawing from. The last thing I want to note is that the primary action line, although faint, is still driving most of the action of this pose. Note that the head, the torso, and the leg are all unified into one movement. This line for the arm seems to flow directly out of the primary action line. There is a relationship between these forms. And this leg provides a beautiful counterpoint. It seems to have an action all its own. These simplified forms would work extremely well as an armature upon which we can attach the bone, muscle, and flesh for a finished figure drawing. So once again here, we can see a sweeping line that starts at the back of the head, moves down the front of the torso, down the front of the legs, and all the way down to the knee, where it's going to change direction and head horizontally toward the foot. Now in drawing this line, I wanted to make sure to leave some room for the arm extending upward. Now it's time to shape the torso. I'll begin by drawing an axis line for the shoulders. I'm sending this line right across the top of the shoulders. I'll indicate the bottom of the rib cage and then move down toward the pelvis. I'll first draw the rounded area for the pelvis. This shape also includes the glutes. And right about here, we see an indentation where this side of the body compresses. On the side of the torso on our right, we see the torso stretching, but on the side of the torso on our left, we see it compress. Now, as I'm shaping the torso, I'm realizing that the axis for the shoulders may be a little bit high, so I'm going to lower it just slightly. These kinds of adjustments are incredibly common at this stage of gesture drawing. This is why we start off with lines that are so light and so soft. I want you to note that I made my second attempt at the axis line for the shoulders just slightly darker. This is a visual indication to myself, so I know which was my first attempt and which was my second attempt. We can see a very clear center line running down in between the breasts and toward the pelvis. The center line helps indicate the twist of the torso. Now I'll indicate the arm on our right extending upward. I actually think this arm should be tilted a little differently. And up here, I'll indicate the hand just slightly. Here I'll indicate the convex top of the shoulder, and then send a line for the other arm extending downward toward the feet. So now that I'm drawing, I'm noticing that this arm should be closer to the pelvis. There's too much space in between the pelvis and this arm. So I have two options. I can move the pelvis to the left, or I can move the arm to the right. I'm going to move the contour for the pelvis to the left just slightly. Once again, you'll see me using a slightly darker line for my second attempt. Again, these kinds of adjustments during the initial phases of the gesture drawing process are incredibly common. I'll indicate the cranium of the head as well as the front of the face. I'm going to draw the convex line for the front leg. This will separate it slightly from the leg in the back, the one further away from us. I'm going to indicate the corner of the kneecap and refine the curve of the calf just slightly as it travels toward the foot. And I'll indicate a very simple shape for the foot. At this stage, the basics of this drawing are in place. It's so easy at this stage to begin to add some refinements. I'll indicate the second knee, the one further away from us. I'll indicate the thumb wrapping around the foot, just to give an indication of the shape of the hand. The information in this drawing is incredibly simple, but at this stage, I can figure out most of what I need to for the rest of the figure drawing. I can figure out the shapes, the placement, and the basic proportions for nearly every part of the body. I'll indicate the location of the elbow here, and I'll refine the shape of the torso just a bit. This gesture drawing is far from perfect, but hopefully you can see that it has captured the action of the pose and it has given us a starting point that we can build from. Before I add any additional details, I'll want to make sure that all of these forms are in proportion, that all of the parts of the body are at the right tilt. Again, this gesture drawing needs some refinement, but this is what the simplified gesture drawing process looks like. For this pose, instead of drawing a single line that starts at the top of the pose and goes all the way down to the bottom, I'm going to do two action lines. One to describe the torso, and a second line to describe the leg. Now, this is always an option you have. I'm already seeing that this initial line for the torso was not tilted enough. Remember, we tend to have a subconscious desire to want to stabilize a pose. One of the things I like about drawing separate action lines for the torso and the leg is that now you'll see that we already have our first attempt at the pelvis. So next, I can draw an axis line for the shoulder. With this axis line drawn, I've already done most of the work for the simple shape of the torso. So now I'll continue to shape the torso. We can see a nice compression right here on the right. Remember, in this pose, the torso is bent. We see this side stretching and this side compressing. Another adjustment I want to make is to tilt this leg slightly more. My first attempt had it going straight down, but this leg is going forward just a bit. Give a subtle indication of the knee, and draw the curvature of the front of the leg as it travels down toward the foot. And here is a simple indication of the shape of the foot. With these forms in place, I will now draw the second leg. While placing the knee, I want to place it in relationship to the first knee. I can see this other knee is slightly higher. And I'll draw a line down to the foot. Once again, I'm going to indicate the foot with a very simple triangular shape. Now I'm going to indicate the convex top of the shoulder and go to the underside of the arm to draw the convex curve there. I'll give a subtle indication of the location of the elbow and then move down the forearm. I'll even give a subtle indication of the position of the hand. But I want to keep the hand incredibly simple because there is a high likelihood that I will change its location at some point. Remember, this initial gesture just serves as an armature, something we can move around. We don't expect that it's going to be perfect the first time. So here I'll draw the curve of the stomach. And now I want to draw the rest of the arm on our left. Here's the convex underside of the forearm. And I will draw a simple indication for the shape of the hand. Next, I'll indicate the center line of the torso. And in doing so, we can start to communicate this beautiful twist that we find in this figure. Notice that near the pelvis, the center line is very close to the left edge, but as it travels up, it gets closer to the center of the body. And finally, I will draw the head. Again, the head is going to be indicated incredibly simply. My initial shape was a little too small, so I'm going to make that just a bit bigger. Remember, this is such an important function that gesture drawings serve. They are intended to be moved and changed as we learn more about the figure. Once again, I want to point out that this is an incredibly simple drawing, but if we handed this pose to a model, they would almost certainly be able to get into it. This is what a good gesture drawing does. It serves as a simple armature. It sums up the pose as simply as possible, but even at this simplified stage, we can figure out all of the shapes and proportions of the pose. And finally, a gesture drawing like this captures some movement. Even this simple drawing looks like it wants to spring to life at any moment. At this stage, I would feel perfectly comfortable adding more anatomical detail and starting to move toward a finished figure drawing. Hopefully you can see how functional this drawing is and how easy it is to take a simple drawing like this and start to add anatomical detail and complexity. So before trying to do any detailed anatomy or any more complex figure study, this is the skill you first need to master. At this stage, you should understand the elements that go into a simplified gesture drawing. And you've also been introduced to a basic process that you can apply immediately in your own work. Now, one of the most common questions I get is, how do I get good at gesture drawing? Well, the answer is that you need to do it a lot. I practice gesture drawing more than any other part of the figure drawing process. To start, I want you to create your own gesture drawings from the 3 poses in this video. Feel free to go back and pause the video. You can even draw along with me. That being said, it's important for you to note that my way of doing these gesture drawings is not the only way. Different artists might approach it differently. Gesture drawing is not a rigorous system, it's an approach. The gesture drawings in this video are what made sense to me at the time I drew them, but different artists might approach them differently. And in fact, on a different day, I might have approached these differently. So you don't need to feel pressure to draw exactly what I'm drawing. It is perfectly acceptable for you to have your own approach and your own solution to these poses. Generally speaking, it is best to practice figure drawing from life. So beyond this video, I recommend finding a local figure drawing group near you. If you can't find one, consider starting one. Most figure drawing groups will start with short poses that are perfect for practicing gesture drawing. Now, if going to a local figure drawing group is just not feasible for you, then please visit my website, brenteviston.com. There, you'll find information on how you can get access to photos of figure drawing poses. Ultimately, a good gesture drawing should find a balance between simplicity and dynamism. You want to capture the action of the pose in a simple way. Your gesture drawing should include just enough information that if you handed your drawing to a model, they would be able to get into that pose, but they should not include much more information than that. But your gesture drawings should also strive for simplicity. They don't need to include a lot of anatomical detail. Whenever you see a complex and shaded finished figure drawing, it's important for you to understand that underneath all of that detail is a simple and dynamic gesture drawing. Now, of course, there is a lot more to gesture drawing than what you've learned in this video. If you want to learn more, if you want to truly master gesture drawing, then I recommend checking out the courses in my Art and Science of Figure Drawing series. The complete Art and Science of Figure Drawing series contains 24 hours of instructional video as well as timed practice poses. You can enroll in these courses through my website, brenteviston.com. The Art and Science of Figure Drawing is also available on Proko.com. Now, if you're completely new to drawing or you want to brush up on fundamentals, I recommend checking out my Drawing Laboratory series. To enroll in the Art and Science of Figure Drawing series, the Drawing Laboratory series, or for more drawing resources, please visit my website, brenteviston.com. I know a lot of students really struggle with gesture drawing, but my hope is that this simplified approach will give you a foothold in the figure drawing process. My goal with this channel is to share my love of drawing with as many people as possible and to share solid instruction with anybody who wants to learn. To help support me in this endeavor, please like, subscribe, and share. As always, it has been an honor and a privilege to be part of your drawing experience, and I hope to see you back here for more videos.